Hello, welcome again. It is Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable. Every week, I discuss the future of the Niger-Delta region. There's no gainsaying the fact that we are humongously blessed with hydrocarbon resources. Every week, we give some time to reflecting on topics relevant to the development of the region and her people, of course. Now, this episode of the podcast is no different, as I'm here once again to focus on how to take the region to a more promising future. As you may already know, the podcast is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC SPDC Total Energies Ajib joint venture, the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, headquartered here in Port Harcourt. Thank you for joining. I'm Adedayo Elushakin. Our topic for today's edition: funding your dreams. Now, today we're diving into one of the most crucial aspects of building a successful startup: securing funding. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale up your business, understanding the investment landscape is key to making your dreams come true. In this episode, we'll break down the different types of funding available, from bootstrapping and angel investors to venture capital and crowdfunding. We'll also share practical tips on preparing for funding, mastering your pitch, and managing investor relations. And by the end of this episode, you'll have a clear roadmap to navigate the complex road of startup funding. Stay tuned as we uncover the secrets to funding your dreams and hear from an expert who has been through the journey. Let's get started and turn those dreams into reality. Again, today's topic, Canvas, is funding your dreams. My guest is Uche Aniche. Uche Aniche is convener, Startup South, and CEO, Havila and Hills. He's a tech and business innovation leader, an angel investor, and an Africa's secondary cities focused fund manager with over 2 decades experience in business communication, process design, startup and innovation management, product development, and community leadership. He is a foremost advocate for startup entrepreneurship ecosystem development in Nigeria, with special focus on the Southeast through hashtag Startup South. Uche Aniche, hi, welcome to Canvas and Niger-Delta Roundtable.
Thank you, Dayo. It's always a pleasure to be here. And Happy New Year to you.
Yeah. Or should I say welcome again? I think
This
this is
is
your second
this is the
appearance on the
second time.
podcast.
This is second appearance on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's good to have you here, by the way.
same here. Great.
When I called you to ask if you would record this episode,
Hmm.
I remember saying to you, I think that this is something right down your alley. I mean,
Hmm.
this is at the heart, at the core of what you do,
Yeah.
helping startups secure funding.
Hmm. Yes.
Was I right?
Yeah. Absolutely right. This is what I have done for close to 10 years, counting. We have started Startup South 10 years ago with the sole purpose of making this happen for lots of founders in the region, right? Startup South is an ecosystem development and advocacy organization that is supporting, and when I mean supporting, providing resources, education, knowledge to founders that are building high-scale ventures across the region, right? One of the things that we've uncovered along the way is that a lot of founders felt that funding was a fundamental challenge, for them. So we set out to solve the problem. So we founded the South-South Angel Network, a pool of professionals investing in founders that have deployed approximately $500,000 in about 16 startups, across Nigeria, in about 3 years plus, right? And following on top of that, we founded the Rebel Seed Capital. It's a venture capital firm, and I think arguably is the only Port Harcourt headquartered venture capital firm that operates, operates in Nigeria. That's operational in Nigeria. So our goal basically is to be able to, find support, find, fund, support, you know, innovators that are building interesting and wealth creating ventures across Nigeria, especially the secondary cities, of which the Niger-Delta has a lot of those secondary cities. And when we say secondary cities, we're looking at those cities that do not necessarily get attention. They don't get, attention from existing VC firms, right? So, but they have the capacity and the potential to produce high quality talent and high quality ventures. So we want to be the first people to invest in those founders and help them grow their business, and help them create real impact for the society.
When you say, when you use the expression was creating ventures, I suspect you're referring to startups.
Exactly.
Okay, so if I set up for example, shawarma stand, is that a startup?
But from the traditional definition of startups, that may qualify as a startup because the Oxford Dictionary or the regular dictionaries would define startup as a new business that just started, right? However,
I sense that there
yes,
was a
yes, of course, yes.
Okay.
However, in our climb, we don't. That's not how we define startup. The startup for us is a new business, yes, but traditionally there would be innovation centric businesses that are looking to create new models, that are looking for new models, new business models that can scale to solve. Basically, they're looking to solve a problem, provide a solution to a problem that has a huge market opportunity, right? That can leverage technology to scale, right? So those are the core definitions of what makes a startup. So when we discuss startups, we're basically talking about businesses leveraging technology or technology businesses. Either they are technology businesses or they are businesses leveraging technology, but they must be looking to solve a huge market opportunity.
Okay, still along the shawarma lines. So maybe in my neighborhood, people like eating shawarma, but there's no shawarma stand available. So they have to travel long distances or order shawarma from long distances, and they have to pay the extra delivery costs as well. So what if I think, okay, I set up a shawarma stand in my neighborhood, so people don't have to go too far, walk long distances, or pay high delivery fees to get shawarma. And I leverage technology. Maybe I have an application or something, so you can order the shawarma from the comfort of your home and have it delivered in a minute or less. Would this still count as a startup?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Not exactly. So when we discuss startup, there are a few words I used that I think we may need to do a little bit deep dive on in order to help clarify what this is. Yeah, so all that you've described speaks to some sort of innovation by this founder, right? However, those are not novel. They're not necessarily something extraordinary, right? They're not things that you would say people are not doing, somebody have not done before, right? That's number one. Now, innovation in itself does not define a startup, in as much as it is great, to have excuse me. So, as much as it is great to have innovation, right? You would there's a word called scale. Scale was part of the definition, right? So what exactly is scale? Scale simply means your ability to grow your service delivery. So scale is your ability to grow your service delivery significantly without increasing the infrastructure that helps you do that. Right?
Okay.
So let's talk about the shawarma. Okay, before we talk about the shawarma, the key question to ask when we discuss startup is, can that shawarma business in your local or your neighborhood, can it possibly serve 1,000,000 people, like on a monthly basis? That's the first question. Can it serve 1,000,000 people on a monthly basis? What would it take for it to serve 1,000,000 people on a monthly basis? For that company to do that, they will need more than your neighborhood. They will need to set up infrastructure in several places, right? Beyond your neighborhood. Okay? So when they have to do that, the implication is that for them to scale, they are also growing their infrastructure cost. Does that make sense?
No, I'm following you.
Good. So it means that they cannot scale. That's what it means. It means that they can't scale. Okay? The second question is, so is it possible for that business, for instance, to make $1 billion, to grow to $1 billion run rate from your neighborhood? The answer obviously is no. When I say run rate, I talk about revenue run rate, $1 billion revenue run rate. Let's even bring it down, $1 million revenue run rate from your neighborhood. The answer is no, right? So when we discuss startup, we're talking about companies that can build and run up to millions of dollars in revenue, right? And possibly get to $1 billion run rate in revenue. That's what we're discussing when we call startups. And there are lots of problems around Nigeria, around Niger-Delta, right? That when you solve, right, you can actually scale it into $1 billion run rate. Possible. All right? Now, here's what could happen for that shawarma spot in your neighborhood to be able to get to that. They would have to think differently about how they process, how they produce, right? It's possible that they don't have to even be the ones producing. Maybe all they do is to set the standard, right? It's possible that they may want to set a standard and get other people in different places to be able to produce on their behalf. And they don't, so we call it asset light. They become asset light. So they don't own the infrastructure, right? But they own and control the market. I'm sure you know some people that come to mind, in the type of business model I'm describing at the moment. You would want to think of the Bolts of this world and the Ubers of this world, right? They don't own the cars that are on the platform. They control the market. They set the standards, but millions of cars on their platforms and they don't own it. And they make money and they run in millions and billions of dollars in revenue run rate, right? That's an idea of the kind of businesses we're discussing when we talk about startups, right?
Yeah.
So, yes.
So startups then. Now, from your explanation thus far, if we have what you've termed a run rate of some millions of dollars, with the possibility of getting to hitting $1 billion, we're looking at a successful startup. So I guess that answers the question of what makes a successful startup. How does a startup become a successful business? Also, let me add to that. Do all startups or are all startups successful businesses eventually?
So I will start with your second question. startups by their nature, actually get to fail, mostly fail, right? Why do they fail? Because it's a business born on experimentation. You're looking for something spectacular, right? And so you're willing to try out, you know the problem you're trying to solve, so you're willing to try out what is going to work, right? And a lot of times they don't get to work, and you may have to either shut down or you pivot, right? So by pivoting, you're basically looking for other things to do around. So you set out to do this, but you find that it's not working, so you decide to go this way and do this, right? That's a story of Slack. I don't know if you know the tool called Slack. The communication platform that a lot of teams use. Slack was not the original thing that the founders set out to do. In fact, Slack was a tool they were using internally in their company. They set out to do something entirely different. But while they were doing that, what they set out to do wasn't working. And when they had a meeting to find a way to either shut down, they decided to ask themselves, well, what else could we do? And it turns out that they developed a tool internally that they were using, and that had been effective. And they felt, other teams could use this. And they put out a message and say, hey, before you know, different teams jumped on it, and Slack became a monumental success, right? Now, startups by their nature will fail. In fact, statistics will tell you that 90% of startups fail, right? 90% of startups fail. But here's the thing. The 10% that succeeds, right, would usually be very phenomenal, okay? I'm sure you can name some of the startups. There are lots of startups that have failed in Nigeria, but I'm sure that if I start calling the ones that succeeded, you will see the impact that they've made in the ecosystem. Flutterwave, right? MoneyPoint, Paystack, right? Andela, OPay, InterSwitch. I can go on and on and on. Yeah, Sitemap. I can go on and on and on and start calling startups, within the Nigerian ecosystem, for instance, that had, succeeded and made a mark, right? And it made impact in the ecosystem. Before Paystack, it was difficult to pay online, to buy things and pay online, right? Paystack changed all of that. Right now, everybody can buy and pay online, right? Flutterwave got in, further expanded that ability for people to pay online, especially from a B2B, perspective, right? A lot of other companies have grown on top of those companies. And that's what typically happens when startups succeed. They create the opportunity, they create some sort of infrastructure for other companies to build on top, right? Like I said, they're usually very innovative things that they are trying to solve. So that speaks to your second question. So the first question was about what does it take for startups to succeed, right? So what does it take for startups to succeed? First, it takes, number one, it takes an interesting, identifying an interesting problem, right? By a team that has the capability to attack or to work on that problem, okay? Then, secondly, it takes persistence, right? And it takes the ability for you to continue to work. What does it take for startups to succeed? It takes first identifying an interesting problem. Like I say, a problem that has enough market opportunity, okay, by a team that have the capacity to solve that problem. And typically, I would say the team should also have access. All right. And so by access, I want to reference the right experience and the right contacts, right? Because it takes all of that to succeed. Then the other one is the environment, to work in an environment that supports that supports innovation, that supports the that the innovation process, right? Of course, community. It takes community, being in the right community as well.
We'll touch on all of those in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the media space for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Have had conversations, spoken to experts on a broad range of issues,
Mm-hmm.
including, you know, entrepreneurship, starting a business and things of that nature. And ever so often, I've heard experts, so to speak, say something to the effect that capital is not the most important thing in starting a business, in an idea, and all of that. Because many people who are venturing into entrepreneurship complain about capital, securing funding for their idea,
Mm.
and all of that. Once again, I'd like to emphasize for my next question, I've heard many experts talk about how capital is not the most important thing in starting a new business. That said, how critical is funding for a startup?
So funding is very important. Is funding is very critical. But just like most of your guests on your shows have said, funding is not necessarily the first thing, because I think what tends to happen is that a lot of people hide behind the mantra of no capital, to not do anything. So I'm sure that in the course of this conversation, we will get to discuss, the process of, how funding works and the types and sources of funding, obviously. So it's important to mention that funding is critical for startups, right? However, funding is not the first thing. The first thing is being able to identify the right problem to solve. The second thing is making sure that you're the right person or the right team to solve that problem. Typically, the right teams would ordinarily have ways to start solving the problem, even if it means as an MVP, right? Even if it means producing an MVP.
MVP means what?
Minimum viable product, right? So the right team would have the capacity to do that. And a lot of times you do not require capital to build an MVP. And that's where people get it wrong. Capital is actually supposed to help you grow, not to help you start. I don't know if that, maybe I should repeat that. So capital is supposed to help you grow, not to help you start. What you need, and by capital, I mean external capital. External capital, because there are different types of capital. There are the capital that you need to start has to come from you, the founder. And that capital, a lot of time, most of it is not cash, not liquid cash. A lot of them could be your goodwill, right? Those are capital. Okay, so founders need to understand that there's nobody that is without capital. The question is, what kind of capital do you have?
At some point in the startup process, I suppose, and going back to a previous expression used, which is scale, you would require what you have also termed, borrowing your expression, external funding or
Hmm.
capital. Am I right thus far?
Yes.
So at that stage, what is the biggest challenge in securing funding for a startup?
Um, so let me do this. Yes, at some point in the evolution of the startup, you require capital to scale. I don't know if we should be discussing that, or we should just first discuss whether we should be discussing the challenge to funding, or whether we should be discussing how how to actually even get the money to start
No,
to get to that point.
we'll get there.
Okay,
We'll
cool.
definitely get there.
So so
But if you don't mind, let's just deal with challenge first.
okay, cool. So the biggest challenge basically, I would say, is the fact that what's the perspective now? So let me talk about it from different perspective. So the first perspective for me would be, um, there are people who are not ready to receive capital, but they think they are ready to receive capital. So there's a knowledge gap, right? That's one perspective. Like I've explained, capital is supposed to help you grow, not to help you start. So if you're not in a position to start growing, right? The external capital you're asking for, people would think twice to give you the external capital. Okay? There are different types of capital.
That takes us to the next question then.
Yeah, we were talking about challenges, right?
Okay. Go ahead. Pardon me.
So another perspective to the challenges would be lack of um, let me say, limited awareness of people who can fund these startups, right? So there are startups that are in the position that are at the stage of growth, right? But there are fewer people, especially within the Niger-Delta, that understand how startups are funded and even the value and the benefit of funding startups. Okay? I hope that we can touch that conversation because I think it's an important conversation. There are lots of people who should be funding startups in the Niger-Delta, but they are not because they don't understand how it works. Okay? So hopefully we can touch that. So those are some of the challenges. All right?
I imagine I will be touching on a lot of these issues that you've raised already. Was you mentioned a while ago that there are different kinds of funding. Which type of funding do you think is most suitable, especially for an early stage startup?
Okay. For so first on funding is categorized. I mean, let's talk about there are categorizations of funding for a business, right? There are broad categorizations. You talk about debt. You talk about debt, and then you talk about equity, and then you talk about grant, right? So debt financing is when a business goes to borrow money, either from a bank with interest, with or without interest. Okay. Equity financing is when a business receives money from a third party in exchange for a stake or a part of the business, right? Then grant is, you know, finance that the business receives. So grant is the finance that the business receives from a third party with no strings attached. Okay? Now, which of these are okay for an early stage startup? I will go for grant and equity. So grant is I would go for grant and equity, okay, for early stage startups. So there are lots of grants, and this is by way of you know, helping founders listening to us. There are lots of grants around. Okay, there are grants by different government, even federal government. There are different grants. There are different opportunities you could leverage. NIDA is running some programs you can leverage. Tony Elumelu Foundation is giving founders $5,000 free, equity free, right?
There is the Child Life Wire program as well. I just thought to mention that. But go ahead.
Exactly. So there's a Shell Livewire program. Those are all grants, and there are no strings attached, right? You don't give up equity for that. So that's one. Then the second is equity. Why equity? When you take on equity, when you take equity, you give up a part of your business. What it simply means is that you're sharing risk and responsibility with the people who are getting involved in the business. And they are not just bringing money, they are also bringing their network, their expertise, their experience to be able to help the business grow from here to here. Okay? So that those are the stuff that I recommend. Why am I not recommending debt financing? Taking debt as an early stage business is a no-no by the nature of our definition, by virtue of our definition of what a startup is. Okay? You would understand that, first off, it's experimental. There are lots of things that are not yet known, right? So you're not very sure. So you can't even project. You can't make projections. Like, you know how they say financial projections. It's difficult to make financial projections at the beginning for an early stage startup. So on what basis are you projecting that debt financing, right? So you're probably going to be putting yourself in a very hard position when you take on debt.
It is Canvas Niger-Delta Roundtable. On this episode of the podcast, we're discussing funding your dreams. Of course, it's in relation to startups. My guest is Uche Aniche. We'll go for a break. We'll return in a moment. Podcast continues. Stay with us.
Our yellow and black markers indicate pipeline and flow line right-of-way boundaries. Your activity could impact on the buried high-pressure hydrocarbon pipelines and flow lines, leading to possible leaks and explosion. Please keep off. Do not engage in sand mining or any form of excavation, pipeline vandalism, oil theft, and bush burning within pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Do not farm, trade, or locate any business on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. It is against the law to apportion land, sell, or build on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Maintain a setback distance of at least 30 meters or about 100 feet from the right-of-way boundaries always. We care for your safety and that of the environment.
This message is brought to you by the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, SPDC, operator of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, Total Energies, and Ajib Joint Venture.
Welcome back. Still Canvas Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. I'm Dial. Once again, we're discussing funding your dreams. This episode of the podcast is in relation to startups. And not many people know more about startups or even funding them in Nigeria, or especially here in the Niger-Delta, than my guest, Uche Aniche, founder of Startup South. Uche, you're welcome again.
Thank you, Dio.
Before the break, you mentioned different kinds of fundings available to startups. you expressed or you explained, which you are convinced is most suitable, especially for an early stage startup. However, when I was researching for this
Mm-hmm.
recording, I came across expressions such as bootstrapping.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's familiar. You're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
such expression. The alternative to that is seeking external investment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are the pros and cons of bootstrapping or seeking external investment, and which is more suitable or best suited for what stage of a startup?
Okay. So bootstrapping is the term bootstrapping refers to founders actually using their own resources and money to fund the growth of the business. Um, or in addition to reinvesting the proceeds from the business in order to continue to grow the businesses. Now, startups by their nature, like we've defined in the course of this conversation, we're typically looking for those businesses that can, we call it moonshots, right? We're looking for those businesses that can scale to the moon, right? And by scaling to the moon, we're looking for $1 billion run rate, $1 billion valuation. Okay, so in other words, we're looking for unicorns. Okay, so unicorns, you know what unicorns are: rare one-horned horses, that are more mythical than real, right? But in the startup parlance, we use the term to describe businesses that are able to grow to $1 billion valuation. Okay, now it is well when you decide to bootstrap. So bootstrapping has its merits. It has its merits in the sense that as a founder, you control significant portion of your business to maturity, right? So you don't give up equity to third parties, right? Now, that's one of the advantage of bootstrap, okay, or bootstrapping. However, um, the third party investors, when they give you money or when they bring in money, if you're going to grow fast, you're going to need money to be able to grow faster, right? So sometimes you may not be able to have enough money internally, or the business may not be able to generate enough money internally. The business looks viable, but it's not generating enough money to sustain a very speedy growth, right? At that point, the startup should be able to take external funding to support the speedy growth in order to capture the market as quickly as possible. Now, here's the thing: when you don't do that, there is a tendency that other people who are well funded, because now you've exposed the opportunity. It's possible the opportunity was there all along, but not exposed, right? Now you have exposed the opportunity, and people now see the model and see how viable this model is. But because you're refusing to take money to take a significant chunk of the market share, in preference for bootstrapping, someone else who has access to funding and who can execute gets funding and gets into the space, and then execute faster than you and takes a significant portion of the market, right? You are left with playing catch up just because you didn't want to take funding. Okay, so you see, that's the difference between, you know, I think that scenario just basically, it just paints the differentiation between the bootstrapping and actually taking external investment.
All right, now off the interview. Remember to keep your responses,
Hmm.
a little bit more compact.
More compact,
All
yeah,
right,
sure.
great. Okay, now that said, we're now venturing into the realm or the terrain, if you will, of investors. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about that for a bit, because
Mm-hmm.
like you've explained just a while ago, at some point or at some stage, you would need to get external funding, especially when you've identified what you termed the unicorn earlier on. Uh, the opportunity may have always existed, but no one saw it.
Mm-hmm.
You've exposed it. So it's not unlikely that others may employ similar models. And if you don't scale up fast enough, other persons are going to get all the funding, they're going to scale. And even if you were the originator of the ideas,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, you may start to play catch up. So let's talk investors now as per funding. But just as a quick aside, um, a business plan still a thing. We'll get to the investors in a moment when they're terrain now. But I've often heard, remember I mentioned to you earlier on, that I've had conversations over the years with on a broad range of matters, including starting the business. And ever so often you hear experts say you need a business plan. It is the year 2025 that we're recording this podcast right now. A business plan still a thing.
Yes, it business plan is still a thing, right? However, it depends on what business you're referring to. For a startup, in the space, in the context that we're discussing, we cannot be discussing business plan because, like we already said, there are a lot of unknowns, right? So, what projections? A business plan is a document that basically makes projections and tells you how the business is supposed to grow, within a period of time, right? But if you are an innovation centric business like we're discussing, that is looking for a business model that can scale, right? It simply suggests that there are a lot of unknowns. Isn't that correct? So the question then becomes, what are you planning? Because you don't know a lot of things. What are you planning? So business plan is a thing for when you have attained what we call when you've achieved product market fit, for instance, and you're at the point of scaling, you're at the point of growth. So that would tend to be for series, you're in your series round. So series A round. I'm sure I know I'm sure you're looking at me and like, what series? The series round, because we've not talked about it. When it comes to funding, there are different rounds, right? There's the pre-seed, there's actually the seed rounding, and then there's seed round and there's a series rounding, the series round, right? And then in the seed round, that we then created, there's then the creation of another subset of the seed round called the pre-seed round, right? They are just basically stages, fundraising stages, right? So, and they apply to companies at different stages of their growth. Okay. So in the series round, it's when you have achieved, you validated this business and you've confirmed that this business actually works. And there are customers, enough customers for this business, and and they're already paying you money for it. So you're basically at the point where you just need to grow. Okay. Now, if you're raising money at that stage, you need to create a business plan. You need to be able to show people how you're going to grow beyond where you are, how you're going to maximize the opportunities that you found in that space. So that's where business plan comes in, but not for an early stage new business that, in the context that we're discussing, a startup. But here's a caveat. If you are working on a traditional business model, like you're setting up a restaurant or the shawarma spot, like you talked about, or barbing shop, laundromat, whatever it is that is a traditional, operating a traditional business model, then by all means, business plan is important for you.
Now, this is the second time, I think, in the course of this conversation, before we went on a break the first time and now, that you say, and emphatically, I believe, that making financial projections for a startup is not a wise thing. Now, if it is not a wise thing to make financial projections, why then would an investor want to put their money in it if they don't know um, if they don't know what your plans are, what your financial projections are, if they don't know if they will make money from this at all? What's the incentive then?
The question you asked me was if business plan is still a thing. Yes, it's a different thing.
But earlier on, in the earlier part of the conversation, you mentioned as well that, or you inferred, or even stating something to the effect that making financial projections for a startup is not wise. And in your course of in your response to my question about business plans as well, you just talked about financial projections. So that's why it's the second time you mentioned it. It's not wise for a startup. So that said, if as a startup, it is unwise to make financial projections, and once again, startup not being a conventional or traditional business model.
Why should an investor be interested?
Yes.
Okay. So let me make a clarification. When we say I made that statement in the context of business planning. There is basically a lot of unknowns for you to plan with. So you cannot make projections with a lot of unknowns, right? That's number one. So you can't build a plan if you are working on a business model that you're basically trying to validate if it will work, right? Now, but that does not mean that you do not have a market you're targeting. Don't forget that I said you are looking to leverage technology to provide a solution to a problem that has a market. So for you to have a market means that you've identified the people who need who have the problem you're trying to solve. Is that correct? Now, if you've identified the people that have the problem you're trying to solve, what you are discussing with the investor is to show them the amount of people that have the problem you're trying to solve. And in fact, how much they will be able to pay you for solving this problem. So for instance, I can tell you that there are 2 million people or 3 million people, okay, in certain geographies, maybe specific geographies, that have this problem that I'm solving. And this is how I'm going to reach them. And for each of those 3 million people, every month, they are going to pay me maybe 100,000 naira in order to use my service. Right? So, 3 million by 100,000. That's if I'm successful in getting those 3 million. Of course, you know that it's unrealistic to say that all the 3 million people will patronize me, right? So I can simply say that maybe 50% or 60% of those, I can conveniently get 60% of the 3 million people, right? And they can pay me 100,000 naira per month to use my service. By the time I multiply 100,000 by 60% of 3 million, I get a value which becomes my market size. That becomes my market size by the time I multiply it by 12, because that's per month. 60% of 3 million by 100,000 times 12 gives me an idea of how much the market size is. And that's what I project to the investor. Investors care about the money to be made, right? So this is the money, this is the likelihood. There's a likelihood that we can make this money if you support us.
Okay.
And that's what I'm telling the investor.
No, still.
And business plan is much more than that.
We're in the investor steering, and I just need to reemphasize that we're talking to investors now.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely. So, where do I meet them? Because I don't think investors are strolling up and down Pitotley Road. Neither do they gather at Rumoko roundabout. Where do I meet these investors? How do I get their attention? And what makes a pitch that stand out for investors?
All right, Dayo. So first and foremost, let's clarify who investors are. There are different types of investors. So you have to first identify which one is suitable for you at the stage where you are. the first set of investors that you need will be your family and friends, right? Your family and friends, they have to first believe in what you do. In fact, if they don't believe in what you do and they don't show, they've not invested in you, it will be unlikely that a third party external person who doesn't know you from Adam is likely to invest in you.
What if my family
Right.
are very bad people?
You should also have friends that are good people. So if your family are bad people, are your friends bad people as well? So you first have to reach out to your family and friends. Okay, then you graduate to angel investors who are most like. So some of your family and friends can actually also become angel investors, right? Now, but angel investors are typically people who want to be able to leverage their experience and their personal finance to be able to, support emerging and innovative entrepreneurs like yourself, right? So they put in money, they put in their experience, and they help you to grow. Then there is the VCs, venture capital firms. Like I talked about Rebel Seed Capital being a venture capital firm. What they basically do is that they take money from people and they help those people. They take money from people and they invest that money into businesses. Now, there's other ones. There's private equity, obviously. They invest at a later stage of businesses. But these other ones I've talked about invest in early to mid to late stage of startups, right? Now, where do you find them? There is an angel network in Port Harcourt, obviously. But first and foremost, you have to be able to connect with their members. So there's an angel network in Port Harcourt. You have to first connect to their members, find out who their members are, get to know them, because I always tell people around me, raising money is a contact game. People don't give people they don't know money. So if you're going to raise money, you have to build your network, you have to build your relationship. So start by connecting with people. Start with your friends and families, right? And then graduate, leverage their network to get into to learn, to meet other people, the people they know. Okay, it's a lot easier for you if somebody that we are connected, somebody I trust, says to me, I know this founder, they're doing something interesting, and I think you should take a look, right? I'll feel a lot more comfortable, especially when they tell me they're interested. They're interested in the stuff or they're already invested in it. I'll feel a lot more comfortable going in because somebody I know and trust possibly is already involved. So I want to go in. So that's that thing that people talk about, the network effect. So for you to increase and improve your chances of getting investment, you want to get a lot more outgoing and go to places where you can meet some of these people. And you find them at events that are startup related, technology related.
When eventually you do meet them or have an audience with them, this takes us to the second part of the question I asked.
The pitch deck.
The pitch. What stands out for investors?
So the first things first. As this thing says, the first 30 seconds. It should be about the problem you're solving. And like I tell people, investors care about making money, right? So I would rather you tell me the size of the problem you're solving from a money perspective, right? And then, if possible, double down on impact. Some investors will care about both, okay? Most will care about making money. Some will care about making money and impact, right? So speak to me about the size of the problem you're trying to solve from a money angle. So like I told you, what is 60% of 3 million? Okay. 0.3 times 6 will be 1.8. That will be 1.8 million, right? So 1.8 million times 100,000 will give you how much? Tell me the value of, tell me that value, total value. So speak to me. You know what? I'm solving a problem. I'm solving XYZ problem, and the market size for this problem is this amount in perhaps billions of dollars or millions of dollars, if possible, right? So in millions or billions of dollars, if possible, tell me that, and then tell me what the pain of that not solving that problem is. That's speaking to impact. Okay? Tell me how you're solving the problem. Tell me how you're solving the problem. In other words, speak to the innovation you're bringing to bear. Okay? Tell me how far along you've come. That's traction. We're talking about traction now. What have you done? Remember when I said you don't necessarily need money initially. Money is to support your growth. That's why talk about what you've done. Traction is important. Then the next thing you speak to me about is the quality of your team. Talk to me who is in your team. What have they done before? What have you done before? What are the other people on your team? What have they done? What makes your team the best team to solve this problem? Now, because a lot of times, these investors, they don't just, because you know you're investing in a new idea or the new business, we're not necessarily investing in that business. We're investing in the team. All right. So the team is important for us.
Well, I think we're wrapping up the conversation now. You've talked about the importance of networking, and that's how you meet investors, angel investors, and the likes. Does Startup South offer networking opportunities, and how does that work?
Startup South offers a lot of networking opportunities. We have communities across many states in Nigeria, but especially within the Niger-Delta. And these communities meet regularly, almost on a monthly basis. And in each of these meetings, you will find people who are interested in investing in startups, right? In addition to finding startup founders themselves, right? So it's an opportunity for both investors to discover what's happening, who is doing what. It's also an opportunity for founders to discover who is investing in what, right? Now, but aside from that, we also have regular big meetings like the Startup South conference in October. Like this year is going to be October 2nd and 3rd.
By the way, this year is 2025.
Okay. October 2nd and 3rd, 2025. We're going to have a large convening like we've always done. This is the 10th edition of our conference, where we're going to have investors coming from across the world to Port Harcourt to basically discuss, to have conversation, opportunity to meet founders. I'm personally having an event. I'm not sure when, we're going live on this, but I'm personally having another a virtual conference, African-wide event, over 100 VCs that are coming into a room, right? Opportunity for people to actually connect and get to know and build relationship, from there, right? So those are some of the things, some of the opportunities that Startup South and me personally provide, right? But I think there's something I need to touch, right? Aside from we've talked about the importance of we've discussed the importance of funding and how people can get funding and everything. We touched on one of the challenges, and we talked about the fact that a lot of people that can actually fund startups do not understand how it works, and as such do not know that they can fund startups, right? So I think it's an important conversation to have. People, maybe that could be another conversation because a whole lot. But what I like to say is that funding startups it's something that a lot of professionals should get involved in. There are lots of benefits apart from the fact that you get to make money. You get to make money. It's like some type of social investment that rewards you. Why is it a social investment? Because you're supporting to build the economy. You're supporting to build businesses that would get to hire more people, that will get to create the economy. I wrote something on my LinkedIn just yesterday, right? Paystack had what they call offsite, and they brought all their staff across the world to Nigeria, about 200 people, and hosted them in Nigeria, right? Guess the budget for that, $250,000, right? Now, imagine the impact of that on the economy, right? So imagine that you have like 20 or 10 Paystack in Port Harcourt alone, for instance, right? And they get to do that kind of event. We're discussing $2.5 million into the economy, right? That's what happens, apart from the other things that happen. So, but it took some investors in Nigeria to fund Paystack in the beginning. And those investors, each of them, when Paystack was sold, each of them made nothing less than 77x what they invested when they invested in Paystack. So you see, they have supported in creating something that has continued to create value in the economy, and they made money in addition. So that's what happens when professionals get involved, and it doesn't take a lot to get involved, and that's why we created the South-South Eastern Gel Network. Happy to talk about that a lot more.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. We discuss funding your dreams. So you have an idea for a startup maybe, and you're thinking, how do I get funding for it? Is it even time to get funding for it? What should I be focusing my energies on? Is it bootstrapping, external funding, angel investors maybe? You heard it all. If you're still unsure, watch the podcast all over again. My guest has been Uche Aniche, founder of Startup South. Uche, brilliant as always. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
I'm Adedayo Olushaki, and all the best with that unicorn that you found. And with the tips I believe you've learned on this episode, you can find the right funding for you to fund your dream. Have a wonderful day, and bye for now.